These parents are celebrating the arrival of their first child. They're taking plenty of photos of this special moment. Their daughter's been the centre of attention for the past 2 months.
Imagine being born in a world where the moment you take your first breath, the timer starts ticking. You're not just a child, you're an investment. Your parents had dreams for you, and those dreams aren't just about your happiness. They're about your achievements, your career, your ability to make the family proud. In South Korea, life begins with expectations, and those expectations don't stop growing. They weigh on you like bricks in a backpack you can never take off. You might have heard of the term Hell Joseon. It's a phrase that South Koreans coined to describe their own society, a place that feels like a dystopian nightmare, where the pressure to succeed is suffocating and escape feels impossible. But where does this pressure come from? Why do people describe one of the world's most advanced countries as a kind of living hell? To understand the roots of Hell Joseon, we have to rewind a little. South Korea's rapid modernization is one of the most impressive stories of the 20th century. In the 1950s, after the devastation of the Korean War, the country was one of the poorest in the world. But in just a few decades, South Korea became an economic powerhouse, home to global giants like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. On the surface, this transformation seems like a miracle, but miracles have consequences. The country's obsession with growth didn't just reshape its economy, it reshaped its culture. Hard work became a virtue, not just for survival, but for identity. Success wasn't just a goal, it became a duty. For the older generation, the sacrifice was a badge of honor. They worked tirelessly to rebuild the nation. But for the younger generations, these expectations became a curse. If you're born in South Korea today, you inherit not just a modern country, but also a crushing set of expectations. Think about it. You're not just expected to do well in school, you're expected to excel. You're not just expected to find a good job, you're expected to climb to the top. And you're not just expected to live your life, you're expected to live the life that society, family, and tradition dictate for you. Now imagine growing up in that environment. Every move you make is scrutinized. Every mistake feels like the end of the world. And if you fail, well, there's no room for failure in Hell Joseon. Let's start at the beginning, school. For most kids around the world, childhood is about exploration, play, and discovery. But for kids in South Korea, it's a race, a relentless, exhausting race that starts before you even learn how to spell your name. South Korean parents have a saying, the child who sleeps less wins. Think about that. Sleep isn't seen as a necessity, it's seen as a weakness. From the age of 3 or 4, kids are enrolled in hagwons or private academies to get ahead. These academies teach everything, math, science, English, music. If there's a skill that can give you an edge, there's a hagwon for it. And it's not unusual for kids to attend 2, 3, or even 4 of these academies in a single day. Picture this. A 10-year-old named Minji wakes up at 6 a.m. She spends the morning in school where she's constantly under pressure to outperform her classmates. After school, she heads straight to a math hagwon, then an English hagwon, then a piano lesson. By the time she gets home, it's 10 p.m. and she still has hours of homework to finish. Sleep? Maybe 4 or 5 hours if she's lucky. This isn't a rare case. This is normal. And then there's the big monster waiting at the end of it all, the suneung, the college entrance exam. The day that South Korea literally stops. No planes fly overhead, no one honks their car horns, and police escort late students to their testing centers. The entire country holds its breath. Why? Because this one test determines everything. Your score dictates which university you can attend, which in turn dictates your career prospects, your social standing, and even your chances of marriage. One test, one day. And if you mess it up, you might feel like your entire life is over. Can you imagine the kind of stress this creates? The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the feeling that you're constantly being judged? And it doesn't stop at the kids. Parents are just as trapped in the system. They pour their savings, their time, their energy into making sure their kids succeed. Some parents spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on hagwons alone. But here's the thing. For every student who gets into Seoul National University or Yonsei or Korea University, there are thousands who don't. And for them, the system doesn't forgive. It doesn't say, that's okay, you'll find another path. It says, you failed. And failure in Hell Joseon isn't just personal, it's social. It's a stain on your family's reputation. It's whispers at family gatherings, pitying looks from neighbors, a lifelong sense of shame. If surviving the gauntlet of South Korea's education system feels like crossing a minefield, entering the workforce feels like stepping into another war zone. The job market in South Korea is brutal. Landing a coveted position at a chaebol, one of the country's powerful family-run conglomerates like Samsung, LG, or Hyundai, is the ultimate goal. But the competition is so fierce, it's like fighting for a seat on a lifeboat. For most people, the battle doesn't stop once you get the job. In fact, it's only the beginning. The corporate culture in South Korea is built on hierarchy, discipline, and long hours. A typical workday often stretches beyond the standard 9 to 5. For many, it's 9 to 9, or worse. Have you heard of the phrase kapjir? It's a uniquely Korean term that refers to the abuse of power in the workplace. It's when superiors treat their subordinates like personal servants, demanding complete obedience and loyalty. This kind of behavior isn't just common, it's expected. Let me give you a real-life example. A few years ago, the nut rage incident made international headlines. A Korean air executive, part of the owning family, berated a flight attendant for serving nuts in a bag instead of on a plate. She forced the plane to return to the gate so the attendant could be removed. That's kapjir in action, a toxic culture where power is abused without consequences. Now imagine being a young employee fresh out of university, entering this kind of environment. You're already burned out from years of studying, but now you're expected to endure endless overtime, constant criticism, and the pressure to sacrifice everything for the company. Take June, for example. He's 29 years old and works at a mid-sized tech company in Seoul. Chun often leaves the office at midnight only to wake up at 6 a.m. to do it all over again. He hasn't taken a vacation in 2 years because the unspoken rule is that vacations are for slackers. His health is deteriorating, but he can't quit because quitting would mean losing face, disappointing his family, and risking his future. This isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle. Your identity becomes tied to your role in the company. You're not June, you're an employee of X corporation. And the moment you lose that job, whether through layoffs or burnout, you lose your place in society. Let's say you survive the education system and land a decent job. You've made it, right? Well, not quite, because now comes the next impossible challenge, buying a home. In South Korea, owning a home isn't just a financial goal, it's a social status symbol. It's a marker of success, stability, and respectability. But for most people, it feels like chasing a mirage in the desert. The housing market in South Korea is one of the most expensive in the world, particularly in Seoul. Over the past decade, real estate prices have skyrocketed, leaving young people with few options. Let's break this down. The average apartment in Seoul costs over $1 million. Meanwhile, the average annual salary for a young worker hovers around $30,000 to $40,000. You don't need to be a math genius to see the problem here. Even with loans, government programs, and parental help, the dream of home ownership is slipping further and further out of reach. And then there's the chonse system, a uniquely Korean rental arrangement where tenants pay a massive lump sum deposit, often hundreds of thousands of dollars, to live in a property for a few years rent-free. The landlord invests that money, and at the end of the lease, they return the deposit. It sounds good in theory, but in practice, it's a system that favors the wealthy and excludes the rest. Meet Hannah, a 32-year-old office worker. She's been saving for a decade to afford a chonse deposit, but every time she gets close, the prices go up again. Her dream of owning a home feels like it's slipping through her fingers, and Hannah's story isn't unique. It's the reality for millions of young Koreans. So what do? Do you keep chasing the impossible, or do you give up entirely? For many young people, the answer is clear. They're opting out. They're choosing not to buy homes, not to marry, not to have children. And this brings us to the bigger picture, how all of these struggles are reshaping South Korean society. We've seen how the education system, corporate culture, and housing crisis crush individuals, but what ties all of this together is something deeper, the unrelenting pressure to conform. South Korea is a society built on Han, a collective sense of sorrow, endurance, and resilience. This cultural legacy stems from centuries of hardship, from colonization to war to rapid modernization. But in today's world, the endurance has taken on a new form, the need to meet impossible social standards. From a young age, you're taught that your worth is tied to your achievements. Success isn't just personal, it's familial. When you do well, your entire family takes pride. When you fail, they share in the shame. This creates a culture where appearance matters more than reality. Social media amplifies this tenfold. On platforms like Instagram, people curate their lives to perfection, showcasing luxury cars, expensive vacations, and picture-perfect meals. But behind the filters lies debt, exhaustion, and anxiety. In South Korea, marriage and family have long been considered the cornerstone of society, but in recent years, that cornerstone has started to crack. Birth rates have plummeted, marriages are happening later or not at all, and young people are choosing to live alone more than ever before. Why? Because in Hell Joseon, building a family feels less like a joyful milestone and more like an unachievable luxury. Let's talk about money. Marriage in South Korea is expensive. There's the wedding, the dowry, and of course the need for housing because no one wants to start their married life living with their parents. But with real estate prices skyrocketing and wages stagnating, many young people feel like they simply can't afford to get married. And then there's the cultural expectation that marriage isn't just a union of two people, it's a union of two families. You're not just marrying your partner, you're marrying into a web of obligations, responsibilities, and expectations. Take Sunu and Shion, for example. They've been dating for 6 years and want to get married, but they're stuck. Sunu's parents want them to buy a home before the wedding, while Chion's parents expect them to pay for an elaborate ceremony. The stress has turned what should be a happy time into a source of constant conflict. Let's not forget the role of gender. In South Korea, women are still expected to shoulder the majority of domestic responsibilities, even if they're working full-time. This double burden, being a career woman and a perfect homemaker, is pushing many women to opt out of marriage altogether. Meanwhile, men are under immense pressure to be the primary breadwinners. If they can't afford a house, a car, and a stable income, they're often considered unworthy of marriage. It's a lose-lose situation where both men and women feel trapped by expectations they can't meet. So, what's the results of all this? South Korea now has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. Entire schools are closing because there aren't enough children to fill the classrooms. The government is scrambling to reverse the trend, offering cash incentives and subsidies for families to have more children. But money alone isn't enough. The problem isn't just financial, it's cultural. It's about the crushing weight of expectations, the lack of work-life balance, and the feeling that starting a family is more of a burden than a blessing. All these pressures, academic, professional, financial, social, they don't just affect your external life. They take a toll on your mind, your emotions, and your very sense of self. South Korea is a nation in crisis, a mental health crisis. The country has one of the highest unalive rates in the world, and the numbers are especially devastating among young people. In South Korea, mental health is still a taboo topic. Seeking help is often seen as a sign of weakness, something to be hidden rather than addressed. Many people suffering from depression, anxiety, or burnout feel like they have nowhere to turn. Even the education system perpetuates this stigma. Schools rarely have counselors or mental health resources, and the focus is entirely on academics. If a student struggles emotionally, they're told to toughen up. The workplace isn't much better. Companies rarely provide mental health support, and workers who admit to feeling overwhelmed risk being labeled as unreliable or unprofessional. Take Chiun, a 25-year-old university graduate. After years of pressure to succeed academically, he finally made it to one of Seoul's top universities, but the constant stress left him battling severe anxiety. When he tried to talk to his parents about it, they brushed it off, telling him to be strong and focus on his studies. He felt completely alone. Chiun isn't an isolated case. Stories like his are far too common. This isolation has given rise to a new phenomenon in South Korea, hanjok, or the loner culture. More and more young people are choosing to live alone, eat alone, and spend their free time alone. It's a way to escape the pressure, to carve out a small space where they can breathe, but it's also a symptom of a deeper problem, a society that leaves people feeling disconnected and unsupported. So where does this leave South Korea? On one hand, it's a nation of incredible achievements. It's a global leader in technology, entertainment, and innovation. But beneath the surface lies a society that's grappling with profound challenges. The pressures of Hell Joseon aren't sustainable. Young people are opting out of traditional paths, rejecting marriage, family, and corporate life. They're calling for change, demanding a society that values balance and well-being over blind ambition. The question is, will that change come soon enough? There are glimmers of hope. Activists and organizations are working to raise awareness about mental health. Younger generations are pushing back against the toxic work culture, advocating for shorter hours and better conditions. And while the government's efforts to address the housing crisis and birth rate have had limited success, they signal a growing recognition of the problem. But true change will require a cultural shift, a reevaluation of what it means to succeed, to live, to thrive. Maybe the answer lies in South Korea's own concept of Han, that deep collective sorrow that has always driven its people to endure. But instead of enduring the pressures of Hell Joseon, maybe it's time for a new kind of resilience. A resilience that says we deserve better. Because in the end, Hell Joseon isn't just a description of a society, it's a cry for help. And it's a reminder that even in the most advanced, prosperous nations, we can't lose sight of what truly matters: happiness, connection, and humanity.